This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And this episode is brought to you by The Athletic, premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Listeners can get 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
A tough season demands some tough questions. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper in the corner. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic. Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team, and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, and welcome to our first episode of Michigan Podcast here in the new year. So a belated Happy New Year. Welcome to 2018 for all of you. You might notice something a little bit different. This is the first episode we've done where I am not decked out in full fan regalia, and there's a reason for that. I want to warn you up front that if you're still not of a mind to not see things through rose-colored glasses, if maybe you're still in a bit of denial, and I think maybe I kind of was too, going into that bowl game debacle we'll talk about in a moment. But this today, I'm wearing work attire to set a tone. This episode is about getting back to work. This episode is about figuring something out. Who are we as a program? Where are we going? Because what we did on New Year's Day can only be described as showing your earths to millions of people. That was a debacle, and I think it was a crystallizing moment. I think, there's a narrative to every season, and the narrative to this season coming in was, could Michigan overcome all the senior losses and having the youngest team in the Power Five and still live up to those preseason expectations? And it turns out we could not. And I don't know that there's too many people that disappointed by that. But the expectation with a young team is that you're building towards something. And when you finish the season the way we did, and then after 15 bowl practices, you do that, it's really hard to hold on to the narrative that you're building towards something, right? The light at the end of the tunnel, it's either an oncoming train or it's something else that's going to hurt. So we're going to open up this week's episode with 6 questions over the course of this offseason that will probably help determine exactly what that light at the end of our tunnel really is. And again, I want to warn you, we are not pulling any punches this week at all. I'm too old for this now, man. I'm 44. I have been waiting going on 15 years for a championship, the kind that I used to take for granted when I was a kid. Speaking of kids, my kid hasn't seen a championship. My kid's not even disappointed by losing to Ohio State. It's his default setting, and he loves Michigan. But he doesn't have any of the expectation level at 11 that those of you that are my age or older had our entire lives. He doesn't get that there's even a rivalry with Ohio State. He's got a kid at his Awana at church who's an Ohio State fan. Then it naturally starts talking smack and egging him on. He's like, why? You guys are better than us. We know that. That freaking crushes me. Every year, as a fan, I spend the gross domestic product of a small Latin American country on my love for the maize and blue, as do so many of you. And I've been doing that now for going on 2 decades. Add that up, and sooner or later, you're talking about real money. Okay? So the fantasy part of this, we'll get them next year, gone. That's out the window now for me. I mean, we are paying for a Nick Saban-like program. And what we saw on New Year's Day was Brady Hoke era-like results. And I'm going to say this from the outset, too. I'm saying all of this, and I'm a Jim Harbaugh slap. Anybody who knows me knows that I am. Man, Jim was my favorite kid growing up. When I used to play the old NCAA football game before they ruined it, got rid of it, I'd create Michigan as the quarterback at Michigan. I always gave myself Jimmy's number 4. And then when I had a son and I started creating him instead, I gave him that number. You know, my kid got a Mays Jumpman Christmas or jersey for Christmas, and guess what number he wanted? That's right, number 4. So this stings me. I really don't want to even ask some of the questions I'm about to, but you know, part of being an adult is accepting accountability, following the truth, even when it's painful. And the forecast for this week's episode is pain. So let us begin. First question I have: how does a Brady Hoke era-like joke kind of performance take place after 15 bowl practices, leading up to a bowl game where, by the way, I don't know if you realize this, folks, Big Ten was 7-0 in bowl games heading into our game. We were the biggest favorite of any Big Ten team. We were a bigger favorite than Ohio State was over Southern Cal by like a full field goal. How? I just how? Where was the development? Well, we had a lot of guys injured for the bowl game. What the hell did they do in those practices? Kill them? We were down a couple offensive linemen there, a couple running backs here, lost this guy there, that guy there. What in the Sam Hill's going on? Last night I watched Alabama put in 6 freshmen in the second half, true freshmen. Left tackle, wide receiver, quarterback, running back, just to name a few spots. And they won the national championship. And oh, by the way, they were down a couple of offensive linemen that were injured for the game too. Well, Steve, that's Alabama. I thought we were Michigan. Whatever happened to you? This is Michigan, for God's sakes. I'm just done with it. I saw a stat today. Under Dabo Swinney at Clemson, 7 years in a row, they have finished higher than their preseason ranking in the AP poll. We have finished lower than our preseason ranking in the AP poll the last 2 years. And we did in 2013, and in 2012, and in 2007, and in 2005. I'm going to stop now because I'm going to start cutting myself if I don't. I'm just beyond tired of it. I'm beyond tired of it. We're paying for Nick Saban-like results. And what we got is a performance that if that had been a Nick Saban coach team, everyone's fired and Nick Saban is probably joining a convent. Would never happen. Just that was a terrible performance. I've never seen a game in my life where a team went from -3 in turnovers or +3 in turnovers to -2 in the same game. And they did it in a quarter and a half. It's over a week later. I still can't talk about it. You can tell. Every time I think I'm over it, I'm going to bring it up. And I think it's because for the first time since we hired Jimmy, I have doubts that we're ever going to get there. That's how bad that performance was. It was a Hoke era joke. Which leads to our next question. Does anybody know what happened to Brandon Peters? Because I thought that was a taller John O'Corn. Inaccurate, bailing out of the pocket, head on a swivel, looking for the next hit. That's not the player we saw at all that had us excited. Frankly, he was terrible. There's just no other way to spin it. I mean, he was terrible. And after being told for a month, and that's the other thing too, I'm done. I don't want to hear any more talk. I don't want any more glowing reports. No. Yeah, you guys can all circle jerk on your own time. I'm done with all of that. All I care about now is what the hell happens on Saturday between the white lines. I don't care about anything else. I don't care about your preseason ranking. I don't care what the recruit thing is. Just show me on the field. That's all I care about, man. That's all I care about. Because we heard for a month, Brandon Peters looks great. He's taking charge. He's not going to let Shea Patterson take this job from him. he looked gun-shy. He looked like Devin Gardner at the end. Devin Gardner is one of the finest student athletes to ever play quarterback at Michigan. Such a well-rounded young man, exceedingly talented, excellent student. But by the end of his career, he had been so shell-shocked by the inability to protect him. Remember that game against Sparty where he pulled up instead of going for the first down marker? Remember how that was symbolic of where we were as a program? Well, Brandon Peters had one of those moments in the bowl game too. We were told, hey, this is his audition. Hey, bro, don't call us, we'll call you. Because that, not a good audition. Good auditions, and then whatever that was would be the opposite of that. What happened to him? I know he got lit up at Wisconsin. The reports are that he was even out for maybe 30 seconds. Okay, but, that could happen at any point in time. It's football. And it's not like he was playing the next week. It was a month later. The lack of an ability to have even competent quarterback play through large stretches of this season with 3 different guys, never in a million years did I think I'd see that in a Jim Harbaugh coach team. And that performance by Peters, if Shea Patterson is not eligible next year, I don't know how that doesn't shake your confidence that this team can take a step forward next year. Because I thought Brandon Peters took a giant step back. Third question, why did the Wolverines blow double-digit leads in their final 2 games of the season? 14-0 lead against Ohio State, 19-3 lead against South Carolina. What happened? Where's the leadership? Where are the coaching adjustments? What happened? How do you explain that? Well, they get overconfident, Steve. What? You haven't beaten a ranked team, a winning team all year? Well, I guess Purdue now counts as a winning team. Thanks. 7-6. And you get complacent, overconfident? You're right, man, because we're just like stacking so many championship banners these days. Come on, man. It's right here, man. That's in the ticker. That's when you're soft. And when I say that, people get mad. Well, these guys are in great shape. They're big. It's not about that. It's a mentality. It's an expectation how we blow in this one. Oh, no, we've been here before. That's the culture of your program right there. That's losing 3 games by 5 points combined when you have a chance at a national championship right there in your grasp. That's what we saw this year. Oh, well, it rained, and that's why we couldn't beat Sparty. I must have missed the part where it didn't rain on Sparty. Just rained on the guys in blue. Didn't rain on the guys in green. That was weird. It only rained on us. That's kind of weird. It didn't rain on them. It's weird how it worked. Oh, well, we had injuries on the offensive line. Yeah. South Carolina wasn't a good on offense going into the game, and they fired their offensive coordinator before it. So, okay. Other teams get results. We have excuses for why we can't get ours. Enough. The hiring of Harbaugh was supposed to end all of that. It was supposed to bring the merciless ruthlessness that our program had been lacking. And for a while, it looked like that was going to happen. But this year, we saw the exact opposite. Question number 4. How did such a high-priced offensive coaching staff produce the worst passing attack at Michigan since 1975? 9 touchdown passes. That's all we had all year. 9. I'm reminded of what Mark D'Antonio said after the Michigan State game when he said, we charted Michigan ran 43 different formations in the first half, and they scored 3 points. Yeah. Well, we had 9 touchdown passes. And just to put 1975 in perspective, that was one of Bo's youngest teams coming off the era that he had from 1972 to 1974 with Denny Franklin, where they went 32-1, shared the Big Ten championship every year, and never went to a bowl game because of the league's rules at the time. They're starting a true freshman quarterback in Rick Leach, playing an option offense. So Michigan only throwing for 9 touchdowns in 1975 wasn't news back then. We were still playing 3 yards in a cloud of dust. 9 touchdown passes with this system. Any system, unless you're a service academy, is embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. Somebody do the math on what we pay our offensive staff and what we got from an ROI per touchdown. I think the Pentagon's better at a P&L than that. That's terrible. Terrible. And I'm done. I'm done being patient, man. I've waited 15 damn years. I'm just 3 head coaches, 4. I'm done. Somebody do your damn job. Because we, the fans, were here when Rich Rod sucked and Brady couldn't get it done and Lloyd stayed on too long. And we're going to be here long after Drevno and all these guys are gone. We're the ones who pay the freight. We're the ones who make it possible for you guys to make $1 million a year as assistants coordinating an offense that produced 9 damn touchdown passes. No. And I'm pissed because I care. That's why I'm mad. If I didn't care, if I hadn't loved this team, if I hadn't given it more time than some of my own human relationships throughout the course of my life, I would not be where I'm at emotionally right now. Because where I'm at is not a good place. All right? Question 5. Why is Harbaugh just 8-7 at Michigan in games played after November 1st? Some smart aleck watching this right now is going to say, well, because, Steve, that's when we play the really good teams. Yeah. As the great prophet Donkey once said, you cut me deep, Shrek. You cut me deep. Yeah, I know. That's why I'm asking that question. We're 8-7 in games played after November 1st. 8-7. 8-7. So there's that. Yeah, it's not good. Which brings up our final question here. Did we watch 2005 or 2013? Let me set the scene here really quick. 2005, Michigan, a 4-loss team. Huge favorite over another Power 5 program, Nebraska, in the Alamo Bowl. We find a way to lose that game, and it produces a comeuppance in the program, some coaching changes, some added extra fuel to the fire motivation. The next year, 2006, everybody's underrating us. We're done. We beat number 2 Notre Dame like a drum in their place in South Bend. Start the year 11-0 and get to number 2. That was really the last chance we had to be a truly great team until 2016. Or was this 2013, where we lost on January 1, 2013 to South Carolina in the Outback Bowl, and then had an early road game at Notre Dame the next year, where we got shut out, embarrassed, and that was essentially when we knew this Brady Hoke thing was cute while it lasted, but it's not going to work. Now, it's one of these two in my view. Lose a bowl game, we were a big favorite, play at Notre Dame early in the year. That 2005 team took it personally, and they opened a can on Notre Dame right there under the guise and gaze of touchdown Jesus 9 months later. That 2013 team wilted. Where do we open the 2018 season here in about 8 months? You guessed it, on the road at Notre Dame. Back here on Michigan Podcast, I want to thank those of you that are supporting our efforts through our Patreon page. And if you are, then you got access to our Instant Reaction podcast following the Outback Bowl debacle, also our predictions of what the final rankings and standings will look like in Big Ten basketball this year. So those of you that like what we do, want to support what we're doing, and give us the ability to maybe produce even more content, a great way to do that is support us at Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here, and we're joined now by Michael Spath of WTKA in Ann Arbor. And Michael, Happy New Year, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing, Steve. Just, it's one of those days, a wedding in 12 days, and a lot of that stuff's just kind of popping up, and suddenly has to get done. And you've been down that road before. I'm sure you can relate.
I can. Funny little anecdote is my wife actually chose Michigan State week in 1996 for our wedding day. And her family...
And you're married?
Yeah. Her family is like all Michigan grads. And even before I could lobby a complaint, when she informed her family that was the day she was going to pick there, they gave her the "what you talking about, Willis" look. So she postponed it to the next March, or next April after March Madness. Well, we didn't make the NCAA tournament in 1997. We went to the NIT that year instead, and we won the NIT. The minister, who wasn't really up on sports that much, thought it was a big deal for Michigan to win the NIT. So he urged us in his message, as we were saying our vows, because our wedding colors were even maize and blue, he urged us to aim high in our teamwork as a couple, like the Michigan basketball team used to win the NIT. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I hope we can do a lot better than aiming for the NIT, brother.
Yeah, wow, that's a great story though, and certainly, we certainly hope that Michigan's aiming higher this year. And I'm marrying a Spartan girl, so we're getting married a week after the Michigan State team playing basketball. So I hope that we're playing the victors at my wedding and not the whatever the Spartan fight song is called.
Well, congratulations in advance from all of us here at Michigan Podcast on your pending nuptials. And now some depression, because I am broken. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't even put on a fan uniform jersey for this week's episode. I cannot even think about our football team without getting a pit feeling in my stomach. that debacle on New Year's Day, the complete systemic meltdown, it's so bad our kicker's talking smack in a game we're losing. I just want to open up, Michael, with what the hell was that?
It was a very disappointing performance from a team that has consistently disappointed most of the year. And I don't know any other way to put it. I think when I tweeted out before the game, I was ready for some optimism. It's the new year. I wanted to turn the page and be a slightly different tweeter than I have been in the past. I want to focus on the good things going on with Michigan football instead of always just just highlighting the negatives. And so I said, I thought this was going to be a moment. You have Brandon Peters back. The offensive line developed some power running game in the late half of the season. The wide receivers have now had a couple weeks off to get better and healthier. All these things, all these positives I were expecting against South Carolina. And God, it's just defensively, you saw it in the first half. Second half, you saw nothing from anybody. Offense stunk. The defense stunk in the second half. The offense stunk for the entire game. The special teams, your kickers making an obscene gesture at halftime. I mean, it was embarrassing all the way around. If that was the best that Michigan could conjure up after a month off, after 2 weeks of practice, this is what I think is depressing for both you and me, Steve, is if that's the best you could come up with against a crappy opponent that had no business being in that game with you, then the hope for it's hard to go there. It's hard to go there.
We were in a bowl season the Big Ten dominated, Michael Spath. We were actually the biggest Big Ten favorite in any of the bowls, almost a full field goal bigger favorite than even Ohio State was. And when you look at how the narrative now for the next 8 months, and maybe that's what it really is for me, it's just not even so much that game, but knowing what most of my favorite college football media that I like to follow during the offseason to get me through the next 228 days, knowing what the line of conversation is going to be, knowing the fake glowing reports we're going to get about this guy's doing this and this guy's doing that. I read something today. Karan Higdon entertained thoughts of going to the NFL draft, and I thought, well, I entertained thoughts of Speedo modeling too, and then I looked in a mirror once. I mean, what the hell? Seriously? But now I'm wondering, though, I'm wondering, is my fandom hurting me? That maybe I can't see things objectively now because my feelings are hurt, and maybe they're not as bad. Things aren't as bad right now as I feel like they are. So where are we truly, brother? Where are we at?
You know what? That's a great question, and I'm very much like you that I feel like I've seen this. I've been so close to this program that it's hard to step away. I mean, I don't. You might have the Vegas odds. You might have already talked about them today. Vegas still likes Michigan. There's still, when you look at the talent, when you think about the composite talent that's going to be on the roster next year, Zach Shaw, my producer, and he writes for 24/7 Sports, said that Michigan should be the 5th or 6th most talented team in the country next year, and they won't be reliant on sophomores and freshmen. They're relying on juniors and sophomores, but they're a little bit better and further along. And I think about, we discussed this on the show last week, and you and I talked about this a little bit. If you think about the jumps that guys made between their freshman and sophomore year, when you talk about Rashawn Gary, you talk about Devin Bush, you talk about Josh Metellus and David Long and Lavert Hill and Ben Bredesen and Michael Onwenu and Chris Evans and Sean McEwen and all these guys that as freshmen they were part-time, little bit contributors, didn't really do a whole lot. And then you look at the contribution and the impact that they made as sophomores and what they're able to do. If they can improve just as much from their freshman to sophomore, or their junior, or the sophomore to junior as they did the freshman sophomore, you got to like that core group. And if the freshmen that we just relied on a lot, we relied on freshmen at wide receiver between Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black, and Nico Collins. We relied on freshmen at the quarterback spot with Brandon Peters. You relied on them on the offensive line with Cesar Ruiz. You relied on them on the defensive line with Aubrey Salmon. If the same group can make that big of a jump that this sophomore group did, then there's going to be a lot of potential for this Michigan football team to get better very quickly in 2018.
When you take a look at the offensive side of the ball, and, it's always fun to go back, and one of the beauties of college football is it has the longest off season So everybody thinks they know more about what's going to happen once the season starts than they do in any other sport. And then it turns out things are dramatically different than what the paralysis via analysis we did for 8 months thought it was going to be. And look at Michigan. I mean, the conventional wisdom all offseason is we were fending off pundits who were saying, hey, the 10 starters you lost on defense, big drop-off there. We still finished top 5 nationally in total defense. And then you look at the offensive side of the ball where just when you thought things were getting better, they got worse at the end of the season yet again. And that's where really you've got one really high-priced coach on the defensive side. That's Don Brown. I would think most Michigan fans probably couldn't even name another defensive assistant, frankly. On the other hand, on the offensive side of the ball, everybody knows those guys' names. The coach's son, this guy's a millionaire, that coach's a millionaire over there. And that side of the ball produced the worst passing attack at Michigan since Bo had one of his youngest teams and a freshman quarterback in the triple option era of 1975. How does that happen? And one of the things I look at is on the defensive side of the ball, Michael, we clearly know who is in charge, clearly. I heard Sam Webb on your station say yesterday morning, and he is as close as anybody who's actively not paid by the football program to that program. And I heard him say with my own ears, he doesn't know how the plays are called for Michigan on the sidelines. How does it happen that we clearly know a guy who's only in his second year, who is in complete and total control of the defensive side of the football, but we don't know what the chain of command is to get a play called on the offensive side? How is that possible?
Well, it's a great question, and it was funny because, Steve, I was a little delayed doing the podcast with you today because I was actually at a lunch for an alumni association of Greater Detroit, and they were asking me a very similar question. Who's calling the plays, Michael? They just want to know who's calling the plays. And I said, guys, I would be flat out lying to you if I try to tell you who's calling the plays because I don't know. And the players can't explain it to us because the players don't know who calls the plays. The coaches seem to understand how it happens. But to answer your question, two ways I look at this. One, probably a big reason you asked, how is it possible this happened? That they didn't have the passing attack. They were one of the worst in the last 30, 40 years of Michigan football. Well, that's the reason that we're now talking about all this staff turnover, because you can't. Even with a shaky offensive line, which is your own damn fault, because let's face it, I mean, this is what drives me crazy when people say, like, well, the players got to perform. Well, you know what? In college and in the NFL, too, it's your job to get them to perform, and your job to develop them and your job to recruit them. It's not like when you're the it's not like when you're the general manager and the head coach and you're like, well, they didn't supply me with the right players. These are the players that you're recruiting, so it's your job to develop them. But that's why heads are gonna roll, why people are gonna move on, because you didn't do a good enough job with your offense. And to answer your question about why is it clear on one side of the ball and not clear on the other, and the answer comes back to, and it's just the way it is, Jim Harbaugh. On defense, Jim Harbaugh does not need to be involved because that's not his side of the ball. He is an offensive guru. He's an offensive coach. He's a guy that has a lot of ideas about the offense. Defensively, he probably has ideas, but that's not the position he played. It's not the position he's ever coached. He's always been a quarterback's coach and an offensive coordinator. He knows the offensive side of the ball. He's willing to turn it over to a guy on the defensive side of the ball. But on offense, he wants to be intimately involved, and that's why you end up with a passing game coordinator, a running game coordinator, a play call coordinator, a guy standing on the bench with a clipboard coordinator. I mean, it's everything because Jim wants to be involved in that side of the ball.
Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor is our guest here on Michigan Podcast. When you take a look at next year's team potentially, set the schedule aside for a moment. You're looking at potentially a 5-star quarterback if Shea Patterson is eligible. They have the potential to start 5 guys in the offensive line who were all top 100 recruits. You could start 2 top 50 recruits, one of them a 5-star at wide receiver in Tariq Black and Donovan Peoples-Jones. If the coaching staff stays exactly the same as it is right now, and that's the talent that they could potentially line up next year, is that increase in infusion of talent alone enough for Michigan fans to assume that the offense will be better than what we just saw, Michael?
Yes, it is. It is. I think the talent, getting a year more experience, getting Shea Patterson is enough for this coaching staff to get more out of them. Is it to get the most out of them? I think that's why people want to see some coaching changes, because I think very few people myself included, can go with the old adages of trust the coaches or give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think there are coaches out there really disappointed in the job that Pep Hamilton did this year, really disappointed in the job that Jay Harbaugh did this year as a running backs coach, really disappointed in the job that Tim Jevno did as the offensive coordinator, if that's what he really is, that he did this year. So will those guys, if all of them come back, get the most out of their kids? I don't think they'll get the most out of them. I think they'll get more out of them because of the talent infusion, because of the maturation that takes place. Does that answer your question?
It does. And that leads to, a follow-up. You mentioned Jay Harbaugh, the running backs coach. This is a sensitive topic, and we don't really know. I mean, we have people have assignments, but you even alluded to, we don't really know what everybody's roles really are. But I know that you're a film guy, and you had a chance with former All-American tight end Benny Joppru to look at the All-22 and break it down, and we featured some of that commentary here on Michigan Podcast as well. And, they do that at your old stomping grounds, the Wolverine, with former All-Big Ten lineman Doug Skeen. And I was listening to Doug's breakdown after watching the film of the Outback Bowl. And he said two things that alarmed me greatly. One, he said he saw guys, the level of effort on offense compared to defense, he said, was noticeable. He said you could see offensive guys. He literally used the word loafing. That was literally the word that he used. I don't know how that's even possible. You only get 13 of these games. This is the last one you're going to play for 9 months. Why you'd ever loaf, I don't understand, but he used that word. And then he said something that I have observed throughout the course of the year about how bad Michigan's pass pro has been among the running backs. And he said it is the worst he has ever seen of any college football team in his life. How are those two things possible at Michigan?
Well, that's a great question. And you know what the thing is, too, is that I do question the efforts of some of the pass blocking from the running backs, especially. And, he had a nice senior season, but Ty Isaac wanted no part of actually trying to block anybody coming. I blame a lot of it on scheme, to tell you the truth, because Karan Higdon is a kid. He's a tough kid. Well, no one's going to doubt Karan Higdon's mental toughness, his physical toughness. We saw him run on one bad leg. We saw him, what he can do when he lowers his shoulder. This is a kid that really wants it, a great kid by all accounts. Chris Evans is another great kid, and a kid that tries as best he can with his slighter frame to deliver and to hit you. But here's the thing that I often found from watching the film, and I wonder if Doug would agree, is how many times the running backs were put in impossible situations to pass block. And what I mean by that is if you're a running back, you're supposed to pick up the guy that's unaccounted for, right? And that unaccounted guy that you're trying to pick up is almost certainly you want it to be a linebacker or you want it to be a defensive back that's on a blitz. You don't want that unaccounted guy to be a defensive end or a defensive tackle. Now, every once in a while, if a defensive end is a great, like a Rashawn Gary, Chase Winovich, and you're double teaming him and he's coming around the edge and your tackle's got his hands on him and your running back steps up and kind of gives him somewhere else he has to go around. Maybe you chip him a little bit, you hit him a little bit, so you're just not making his life easy. What you never want to do, Steve, is you never want to have a defensive end coming without any offensive lineman blocking him and then asking your running back to pick that guy up. You never want to ask your running back to have to step up into the middle of the pocket and take on a defensive tackle that's stunning. And you know what happened far too frequently was those two things, was blown coverages, blown communication among the offensive line where your right tackle and your right guard are not on the same page, and all of a sudden a defensive end is coming in and you're asking Karan Higdon or Chris Evans, who are all of 200 pounds maybe, to block a 6'3", 280-pound guy, and then you're gonna look at that and go like, come on, man. Like in those moments, the one thing that the running backs could have done a better job is they probably could have given a little more effort. But, Steve, I don't know if you've ever stood in front of a locomotive before and said to yourself, like, it's your job to block that guy.
Right.
How much effort are you going to give when that's your responsibility?
Right.
It's hard to do because you're a running back that's taking a pounding on 20 to 25 carries, and now you're telling me because my guys up front screwed up that I've got to step up and take this guy on, and you're going to judge me if I don't do a good enough job with that? I don't know. I know that if I was Chris Perry in that Michigan State game in 2003 where he carried the ball 51 times, and one of his offensive linemen would have screwed up and a 300-pound defensive tackle would have been coming at him, I think I'm like carry number 40. I would have looked at that guy and been like, screw it. I'm not blocking this guy. I'm already getting my butt kicked.
Final question for you, Michael. Now that you've had a full week and a half or so to talk to Michigan fans there in the epicenter of Ann Arbor. For those of us that are Michigan fans watching us here on YouTube all over the country, maybe even all over the world, give us the temperature in the room there of the local fan base and community. Where are people at right now?
You know what? This is a tough one because I've heard something before where your callers are not your listeners. But every time I've heard that, and people say, well, the most vocal, the angriest are the ones that are calling up, and so you can't gauge a fan base by the callers. I said, okay, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt. And you can't gauge a fan base by the people that are on Twitter, and you can't gauge a fan base by the people that are on message boards, and you can't gauge a fan base by. I thought to myself, why is everybody always telling me how you can't gauge a fan base by all the people that are passionately following the team to the point where they're willing to go and join websites and talk and call into talk truck radio? I said, the fact of the matter is that is your fan base. That is your fan base because those are the people that are willing to spend the kind of money that you're requiring in today's college sports to go to bowl games and to buy season ticket license and all those different things. That is your fan base. And if that is your fan base, I can tell you that most people are pretty ticked off. I was at this luncheon today. There are about 50 people for the Alumni Association of Greater Detroit. And I will tell you the one conversation that stood out to me was a woman who raised her hand to ask a question. She said, she's like, I'm a woman. And I said, yep, I can clearly see that. She said, I'm not trying to stereotype myself or my gender, but I don't follow football as much as my husband does. And I don't know as much football as my husband does. But I can tell you that they are driving me crazy. And I'm so mad right now because the football that I understand and how much, this used to be a passion, something I enjoyed. It's I'm just mad after every single game. Instead of enjoying myself, I'm pissed off after every single game because of how bad they're playing. And she actually asked me, she said the thing that she's most disappointed about with Jim Harbaugh is that she thought Jim Harbaugh was a cutthroat killer.
Yep.
And she's like, I don't understand why when we're playing against South Carolina, we're playing against Michigan State in the past, we're playing against Iowa, we're playing against some of these teams. I don't understand why we don't know how to step on their throats and choke them out. And I thought to myself, my God, this little diminutive woman is telling me how she wants to step on their throats. People are angry. People are upset, and that anger is being directed at Jim Harbaugh. And honestly, you and I would agree on this 100%, Steve. 3 years ago, if I would have told you that at the end of the 2017 season, the fan base would be really, really ticked at Jim Harbaugh, neither one of us would have believed it.
No, that woman summed up where I'm at perfectly. And this is where my fandom and the fact that I'm a Jimmy Slap hurts me. Maybe I had him built up to mythic proportions, and this is my own fault. But I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. It goes beyond Jim. I'm tired of losing to Ohio State in everything. How we lose to them, and now we're losing them in hockey and women's basketball and at home. We lose to them in everything. I'm tired of not being in the Big Ten championship conversation. I don't know why a guy can get to a Super Bowl faster than he can get to the Big Ten championship game. I do follow this probably more than I should. That's where I'm opposite of the woman you're talking about. I'm a freaking idiot savant where this stuff is concerned, and I can't figure out why we have a coach that can get to the Super Bowl, but he can't finish higher than third in the Big Ten East. I don't understand that. I'm trying to be patient. If it weren't for his resume, I would be lemming over a cliff right now. And this team this season did something that even really bad teams under Rich Rod didn't do. It really robbed my joy watching games. At least there was Denard Robinson to make a play. This team made it really not fun. It lionized Michigan football this year. I mean, it was the same mistake. I was going Bobby Ross in my man cave. Do you remember that famous moment with Bobby Ross where he right before he quit, where he came into the post-game press conference and screamed out, "I don't coach those holdings. I don't coach them to jump off sides." Do you remember that? That's what we watched this season, and it stole my joy for Michigan football. And I didn't think that was possible, but this season's team did.
Well, Stephen, I can understand that, and I understand it's going to be a long off season for all of us. But I tell you what, if Michigan comes out and beats Notre Dame under the lights, all that joy will just come flooding back.
Agreed. That's a long 8 months, though, brother.
Sure is.
Hey, enjoy the wedding and the time. It's always good to talk to you. Go Blue. We appreciate it, Michael.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
All right, that's Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. More Michigan podcast in a moment. There's a look at The Athletic, our partners here on Michigan Podcast. Some of the best online sports commentary you'll find anywhere on the interwebs over at The Athletic. And right now, through our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast, you can get a discounted subscription to The Athletic. Promo code DSP, D as in David, SP as in Paul, DSP, promo code DSP at theathletic.com, theathletic.com. Well, now that the season is over for college football, it's always interesting to go back and look at what you predicted before the season, but I wanted to do it with a different set of predictions that weren't so much predictions, but evaluations. If you watch the very debut episode here on YouTube of Michigan Podcast, we debuted a new metric that I decided I wanted to see how accurate it was before I incorporated it into my annual preview. But we went through and assessed the 4-year talent base and foundation of every one of the Power 5 teams and Notre Dame in college football. And we did that by looking at the 247 composite recruiting rankings. You have 5 points for a 5-star, 4 points for a 4-star, 3 points for a 3-star, and then we didn't give you any points for players ranked beneath that, simply because the level of development was such now a wide variance. There was too much margin for error. And then we followed up with, did you have guys leave early, things of that nature. And then we added up everybody's points and we looked at who truly has the best 4-year roster talent foundation. Some of you probably asked, well, hey, Steve, why didn't you guys do it, for 5th-year seniors? Because there's very few programs nowadays. Stanford is one that still redshirts a lot of their freshmen, but there's very few programs that rely on 5th-year players anymore, because a lot of times if guys are good enough to play at all, they play right away. And then if they are redshirted, the minute they're eligible for the NFL draft, they tend to declare. So again, that's a bit of a wide variance, so we left that out as well. And as I went back and took a look at our debut episode back in May and what some of the findings of that 4-year roster talent foundation turned out to be, it's amazing how close it was to some of the key developments we saw during the course of the 2017 college football season. Let's check out a few of these. For example, it forecast that Notre Dame would bounce back. It had Notre Dame the 13th most talented team in the country. And you know what? They went from 4-8 in 2016 to 10-3 or 9-3 in the regular season in 2017. So that forecast showed us that Notre Dame had underperformed its talent, and it was more likely that it was going to reach its talent level than have a repeat performance, and that roster evaluation was correct. Next, you look at Michigan State, Sparty. It projected Sparty to have the 4th most talented team in the Big Ten, and that's after the disastrous 3-9 that they had in 2016, all of the attrition they had leading up to last season, and yet they were still the 4th most talented team in the league. And guess what? They finished as about the 4th best team in the league when it was all said and done. So again, that roster talent evaluation was pretty much right on. Next, look at Washington. Now, our roster talent evaluation said Washington was one of the most overrated teams in the preseason, and they only had the 25th most talented team in the country. And when you look at Washington's actual season, they only beat one good team all year, and that was Washington State in the Apple Cup. They lost to Penn State in the bowl game. They lost to Stanford and Arizona State in the Pac-12. Didn't play that strong of a schedule. So again, it is about the Jimmies and the Joes, even more than the X's and the O's. And if I would have had Washington 25th in my preseason poll, you guys would have told me I was nuts. But yet, when we analyzed their talent, that was what their roster evaluation came out as. How about the Pac-12 overall? Pac-12 was down overall when we debuted this show back in May. We had no teams among the 10 most talented rosters in college football, including USC, who was in everybody's top 5. They were Lee Corso's pick to win the national championship. And lo and behold, we're sitting here at the end of the year, and guess what? Final AP poll, no teams from the Pac-12 in the final top 10. So there you go. Talent wins again. How about Oklahoma? Oklahoma was clearly the class of the Big 12 in our talent roster evaluations. Meanwhile, Oklahoma State, a team I liked a lot in the preseason, it didn't really have the talent to match the preseason hype. In fact, their overall talent score was right around Michigan State's. And Oklahoma State was getting a lot more preseason love than Sparty was. So again, the roster talent evaluation nailed it. Jimmies and Joes, more so than X's and O's, and even projecting schedules. Now to the SEC, we had Georgia and Auburn. Each were 2 of the 4 most talented rosters heading into the season. Auburn was 4th. Georgia was 2nd. Georgia was number 2 in total roster talent points, behind only Alabama, who played for the national championship. The top 2 teams in our roster talent evaluation, Alabama and Georgia. And hey, Auburn, They beat both of those teams. So again, Jimmy's and Joe's went out over X's and O's and W and L'ing people's schedules. And then finally, what about the home team, Michigan? Turns out, when our roster talent evaluation said that Michigan had the youngest team in college football with a full 72% of its roster points coming from the 2016 and 2017 classes, that was more than any other team in the nation. Turns out that was right, too. Michigan ended the year being the youngest team in the Power 5. So you can bet when I do my full-blown preview this coming summer, I'm going to use that roster talent evaluation metric a lot more than I did this past year because it was right on the money in many occasions. All right, you just saw my final top 25 college football for 2017. Let's look at this week's Twitter poll results here on Michigan Podcast. And we asked you, will Michigan be better than 8-5 in 2018? And opinions are split. Only 53% of you said yes. Now, if Michigan had played the Outback Bowl the way they were expected to, if they had gone on from that 19-3 lead to win from there, I got to believe this would, if we asked that same question, it would be at least 70-30 yes. But I'm not alone. A lot of people's confidence in where we are as a program shaken by that ass-showing display on New Year's Day. Just a terrible, terrible display of Michigan football. Our question of the week comes from Isaiah. He wants to know, hey, are we overreacting? Well, yeah, of course we are. We're fans. But he goes, hey, we predicted, many of us did, an 8-win season. That's what we got. I was really angry yesterday. Of course, he wrote this the day after New Year's. But we are the youngest team in the NCAA. Harbaugh will turn this around. Drevno is still a problem. He probably gets fired, but I think we will improve. Let me say this. Is it possible we're overreacting? You bet. You bet it is. The only reason I'm not jumping ship right now after this season and what we just saw, and then throwing in the way last season ended on top. I mean, guys, we lost 3 of our last 4 games last year. We're 8-5 this year. Do the math. That's not a good record, okay? The only reason I'm not Hare Krishnaing right now is Harbaugh's resume. That's the only reason. The only reason I have any semblance of a grip. And I want you to know during the course of this week's episode, I've been dying inside the whole time. These are tears of a clown. Okay? The only reason, man, I am not giving you the goodbye cruel world episode of Michigan Podcast is Harbaugh's resume. That's it. It's the only reason. Hey, thanks for bearing with me. Misery loves company. And thank you for being a part of what we do here each week on Michigan Podcast as we get going with 2018. Want to thank our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, to follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Want to thank Michael Spath from The Insider, as well as WTKA in Ann Arbor for joining us this week as well. We'll see you again next week. Until then, go Blue.